Calico Joe Chapter 14. Chapter 14 is taking place in the past. Long after the police officer left, my mother and I sat in the den and watched westerns. The doors were bolted, the shades were drawn, every light in the house was on. The officer promised to patrol our street, and we were still afraid. Perhaps we should have dismissed the call as a prank by an irate Cubs fan who found our number in the phone book, but it felt much more serious than that. We had never received such a threat, and given the trauma and emotions of the night, we were unable to shrug it off and go to sleep. As a reminder, after Warren Tracy hit Joe Castle, Paul and his mom got home and they received a phone call threatening to kill his dad and burn down their house. People are not happy with Warren Tracy and what he did to Joe Castle. During a commercial, my mother asked, "How did you know he was going to hit Joe Castle?" She was on one end of the sofa. I was on the other. Both of us were still dressed. "Because that's the way he plays baseball," I replied. "Why do they allow beanballs?" "I don't know. I've never heard a good reason." "Such a stupid sport," she said. I didn't argue. We were also afraid that Warren might stagger home and cause trouble. He had been forced off the field with a bloody nose, so he wasn't badly injured in the brawl. But if he wasn't home by 3 a.m., he wasn't coming home. He was probably in a bar showing off his bruises, bragging about his skills as a beanball artist, and no doubt taking credit for the Mets' win. I dozed off, but at 6 a.m. my mother nudged me and said, "Here's the news." Channel 4 out of Manhattan began the day at 6 a.m. with news, weather, and sports, and they didn't waste time getting to the story. "A wild night at Shea," the reporter gushed as the footage rolled. From a camera somewhere near the Mets dugout, the tape showed the beanball and Joe going down. Again in slow motion, and again as the reporter described it in detail. He said that Joe was in serious condition at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. At least he was alive. Next up was the brawl, and just as in real time, it seemed to go on forever. Having been an eyewitness, I had seen enough. The entire episode made me sick and depressed, and as I realized later, it would turn me against the sport. When the sun was up, I walked to the end of the driveway and retrieved the New York Times. I glanced up and down the street to make sure that everything was safe, but at the time did not realize I would be looking over my shoulder for many months to come. So Warren's decision to hit Joe that day doesn't just affect him and his baseball career, but it also affects his family. And not just at that game and not just that night, but here Paul says for many months to come, because fans were so mad. And we've seen sports fans before get upset and how much they can turn against someone and how violent that can get and how long that hatred lasts for. My mother sipped coffee and flipped through Section A. I, of course, read every word about the game and all of its related issues. The front page of the sports section had 2 large photos. The first was Joe on the ground seconds after being hit and before the trainers crowded around him. The second was a beautiful shot of Razor Ruffin flattening my father with a bruising tackle. Ruffin had no comment after the game, nor did Warren Tracy, Yogi Berra, Whitey Lockman, or any other player or coach. There was little doubt, though, that the fighting was far from over. The 2 teams squared off again at 2 p.m. that afternoon. The doctors at Mount Sinai weren't saying much, but Joe was unconscious and in serious condition. The phone rang, and we both stared at it for a second. I was closer, so I slowly lifted the receiver. "Hello?" An agitated voice yelled, "Warren Tracy's a dead man!" My mother quickly unplugged the phones. The Chicago newspapers were outraged. "Beaned!" screamed the headline in the Sun-Times just above a photo of Joe Castle on the ground, his helmet nearby. The Tribune was somewhat more restrained. Its headline read, "Mets find way to stop Castle." Mid-morning Saturday, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn met with his executives in the offices of Major League Baseball in New York City. After reviewing the footage and talking to eyewitnesses, he suspended Razor Ruffin and Whitey Lockman for 10 games, Warren Tracy for 5, and 8 other players for 3 games each. His office issued a banal statement wishing Joe Castle a speedy recovery. So yes, some of the players do get in trouble for the fight that happens on the field after Joe Castle leaves in an ambulance, right? So we have Razor and Whitey being suspended for 10 games. Warren, for hitting him and putting him in the hospital, only 5 games, which is just crazy to think about. Shea was sold out again for the Saturday game, with many more Cubs fans there and looking for trouble. A smoke bomb landed near home plate just after the first pitch was thrown by Tom Seaver. The game was delayed for 15 minutes while the air cleared. The Mets fans booed, the Chicago fans cursed. The atmosphere in the park was tense. Security was beefed up considerably, and uniformed policemen stood almost shoulder to shoulder along the warning track. Joe had been hit by the third pitch thrown to the third batter in the 3rd inning, and with perfect coordination, a wave of smoke bombs rained down on the field as Tom Seaver threw the third pitch to Bert Hooton, the Cubs starter, in the top of the 3rd inning. Fights broke out as Mets fans attacked the Bombers. Arrests were made. The game was delayed for half an hour as warnings blared from the PA's announcer. An ugly situation was getting worse. So it's not just the players that get in on this. At the game that next day, you have the Cubs fans waiting until that 3rd inning, the 3rd batter, which is what Joe Castle was when he got hit by Warren, and they start throwing smoke bombs down onto the field. So the fans are really upset that their star player is lying unconscious in a hospital, and rightfully so. I tried to watch the game but could not. I wanted to leave the house and hide at the Sabatanis for a few hours or a few days, but then my mother would have been by herself. So I stayed in my room, turned the radio on and off, and killed time. When the Mets were in town and my father was home, I usually waited a couple of days before clipping articles from the sports page for my scrapbooks. But I was bored, and he wasn't home, and I frankly did not care what he thought. Sitting at the kitchen table, I carefully cut out the stories from the Times, then went to my closet where I kept a dozen scrapbooks, photo albums, and card collections. I maintained these in meticulous order, and to my knowledge, no one ever touched them but me. Because of the avalanche of stories and photos of Joe Castle in his historic debut, I had reassembled all of his material into his very own scrapbook. The only other players to be so honored were Tom Seaver, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, and Catfish Hunter. The rest of the scrapbooks were collections of memorabilia, articles, and photos dedicated to entire teams: the 1973 Mets, the 1972 Mets, the Big Red Machine, the 1972 Oakland A's, and so on. 2 years earlier, I had opened a scrapbook dedicated to my father, but there simply was not enough material to sustain it. My Joe Castle scrapbook was missing. I searched every inch of my closet in my room, and when I was certain it was not there, I stretched out on my bed and stared at the ceiling. Jill was away at camp, and besides, she wouldn't touch anything remotely related to baseball. Nor would my mother. Our home had a basement with a small washroom, an even smaller utility room, and a large game room with a television and a pool table. From the game room, there was a door that led to the backyard. Coming home at all hours of the early morning, my father often crept into the game room and passed out on the narrow sofa. Sometimes he slept there when my parents were fighting. Sometimes they fought there, away from Jill and me. Often on the days when he pitched, he would spend hours down there, alone, with the shades pulled and lights off, lost in his own world. He considered the game room to be his own private little territory, and that was fine with the rest of us. If he wanted it for himself, we were happy to stay away. I eased down the stairs, flipping on lights. In the game room, I found my scrapbook on an end table next to the sofa. It was open to the 8x10 photograph inscribed to me, "To Paul Tracy, with best wishes, Joe Castle." Next to the scrapbook was an orange Mets Stadium cup, his cup, the only cup from which he would drink his banana milkshake precisely 6 hours before his first pitch. He had once flown into a rage and broken dishes in the kitchen when he couldn't find that cup. I froze when I realized what I had discovered. It was like walking into a crime scene and having a delayed reaction as the truth settled in. Alone in the semi-darkness, the criminal had quietly plotted his actions, then inadvertently left behind the evidence. I backed away and went to find my mother. We were both rattled, frightened, and tired, and we decided to leave. We packed our bags quickly, locked the house, and drove to Hagerstown, Maryland, to stay with our parents for a few days. Warren could have the house and the death threats and all the baggage and debris he so richly deserved. I didn't realize it at the time, and I'm not sure my mother did either, but it was our first big step towards separation. So here, Paul uncovers something big. There's a lot in the newspaper about Joe Castle and him being injured, so he decides, okay, I'm going to add to my scrapbook. So he goes to where he keeps his scrapbooks in his closet, and his Joe Castle one isn't there. And he's like very meticulous about how he keeps these scrapbooks. And he has a bad feeling in his stomach that the only other person in the house that would really care about these scrapbooks is his dad. So he goes down to their game room where he knows his dad hangs out sometimes, and he finds the scrapbook there opened up. And so he knows what his dad did. His dad went to his collection, opened up the Joe Castle scrapbook, saw that his son had an entire scrapbook dedicated to this guy, but doesn't have one dedicated to Warren Tracy because there's just not enough information there about his dad. He has one about his dad's team, the Mets, but not just about his dad. So his dad sits there and he thinks about the fact that his son doesn't have an entire scrapbook for him. And remember, Warren kind of has a big ego, but his son does have an entire scrapbook dedicated to Joe Castle, this newcomer. And his dad looked at that before the game. And so Paul knows, okay, this is one of the things that set my dad off. Yeah, it upset him when Joe hit that homer and ran around and kind of pumped his fist when he was running around the bases. But before that, Warren was already out to get Joe because of the scrapbook that he found that Paul had created. So then that causes Paul and his mom to leave the house for a while, and they go and stay with his mom's parents and get out of that toxic environment. The Mets won the second game of the series that Saturday and did so without having to fight for it. 2 pitchers were ejected for throwing at batters, and both teams were itching for another brawl. But with so many players suspended, the issue of winning games became more important than winning beanball wars. Baseball waited for Joe to wake up, to snap out of it, put some ice on his wounds, return to the stadium, and continue to dazzle and set records. But as of Sunday morning, he was still in a coma. So imagine how hard you have to be hit by a baseball to be in a coma for a few days. The Mets won Sunday, and on Monday night completed a 4-game sweep. The Cubs had roared into New York with a 10-game lead, and they limped out of town reeling and already feeling the pressure of another late-season collapse. They had won 28 of the 38 games in which Joe had played, but they were obviously a different team without him. On August 30th, Warren Tracy started at Shea against the Pirates. He gave up a single to the leadoff hitter, then walked the next 2. With the bases loaded, he hit Willie Stargell in the ribs. It was not intentional, but nonetheless, Stargell didn't appreciate being hit, especially by a pitcher who was by then the most notorious headhunter in the game. He said something to my father as he slowly walked to first base, and for a moment, things were tense. The umpires on high alert jumped in and prevented trouble. His next pitch was a fastball down the middle, and Richie Hebner hit it 400 feet for a grand slam. By the time Yogi could get him out of the game, the Pirates were up 7-0 with no outs. 4 days later, on September 3rd, Labor Day, my father walked to the mound at Busch Stadium in St. Louis and was met with a thunderous round of boos and hisses. He lasted 2 innings, walked 4, struck out none, hit no one, and gave up 5 runs, and was rapidly pitching himself out of the rotation. The New York sports writers were howling for his replacement. With Joe Castle still unconscious in a New York hospital, Warren Tracy was hated everywhere he went. His name was toxic. His pitching was a disaster. His teammates were winning, but they were also tired of the distractions he brought to the game. It was obvious he wasn't worth the trouble he was causing. So not only did Warren Tracy ruin Joe Castle's life that day, but he also ruined his own life. All the teams, all the fans, wherever they travel, hate him, and his pitching is going downhill quickly.